second U.S. aircraft carrier is being sent, putting more American firepower behind President Trump's efforts. Comes after Trump only days earlier suggested another round of talks and exchanged messages with U.S. intermediaries.
4:11 local time. The radar shows something that does not belong there. At first, it looks like a small spike. Then it holds. Then it grows. No civilian flight plan. No transponder. No identification code. Just a large, fast-moving return coming from the north. Inside the monitoring center, no one panics. They never do. The room stays quiet. Screens glow. Operators lean closer. Fingers hover over keyboards. New track, someone says calmly. Altitude rising fast, speed increasing. The path is straight, too straight. Not wandering, not drifting, deliberate. A second radar confirms it, then a third. This is not interference. This is not a glitch. This is a strategic aircraft. The object climbs higher, entering airspace corridors commercial planes never use. It pushes through Mach numbers that normal patrol aircraft rarely touch. Its course aims directly toward the outer edge of NATO-monitored airspace. It isn't hiding. It wants to be seen. More data streams in. Long fuselage, variable sweep wings, 4 massive engines. Heat signature intense and steady. The system finishes processing. Identification appears on the screen. Tu-160. Russia's largest strategic bomber. The room grows even quieter. This aircraft is not built for routine patrol. It is built for range, for endurance, for carrying long-range cruise missiles, for sending messages without firing a shot. The bomber continues climbing, smooth, stable. No sharp turns, no hesitation. A radio hail goes out on guard frequency. Unidentified aircraft approaching monitored airspace, state your intentions. Silence. The bomber holds course. Another hail. Silence again. Its altitude levels off at a point chosen carefully. High enough for maximum sensor range. High enough for missile launch efficiency. High enough to observe without being touched. The captain steps into the room. No rush. No loud orders. He studies the plot. The Tu-160 makes a tiny heading change, just 1 degree. But that degree shifts the closest point of approach significantly. It is testing the reaction window. Speed increases slightly. Not dramatic. Just enough to reduce interception time. The math updates instantly on every screen. Minutes matter now. Scramble order. Elsewhere, far from this quiet room, hangar doors slide open. Fighter pilots run. Helmets on. Ladders pulled away. Engines ignite in violent bursts of fire and sound. Back on the radar display, 2 NATO fighters begin climbing rapidly toward an intercept path calculated in seconds. The bomber maintains course. It does not accelerate further. It does not slow down. It flies like it expected company. The fighters approach from the side, not head-on. A deliberate choice. Head-on creates tension. Side approach communicates control. Distance closes. The Tu-160 remains steady. Wings extended in cruise configuration. Engines burning clean and even. No evasive movement, no defensive posture, just pressure. Electronic activity begins to show on monitoring systems. The bomber's radar sweeps carefully. Not aggressive, not locking, just observing. It is collecting data. The fighters move into visual range. Now the bomber is no longer just a radar return. It is massive. White body, long nose, swept wings, a machine built for global strike capability. And it is flying right along the edge of NATO airspace. Another radio hail. No response. Inside the command center, one phrase is spoken quietly. Decision window narrowing. If the bomber continues its current path, reaction time drops below safe margins. If it turns away, the encounter ends clean. If it keeps holding the line, the tension stretches thin. The fighters hold formation, offset position, close enough to matter, far enough to avoid escalation. The Tu-160 makes another small adjustment. Not away, slightly inward. The room freezes. This is the moment where miscalculation becomes history. And then, nothing. No turn yet. No climb, no dive. Just steady engines and a long white fuselage balanced on the edge of restraint. The clock continues ticking. Perfect. Continuing with the same tone and simplicity. 4:23. The distance between the Tu-160 and NATO airspace narrows further. The fighters are now firmly in position. One slightly above, one slightly below. Both offset to the side. Cameras recording. Weapons safe. Radars mostly silent. The bomber does not acknowledge them. It flies as if the fighters are part of the sky. Inside the monitoring center, numbers update constantly. Speed, steady. Altitude, steady. Heading, steady. That steadiness is the message. The Tu-160 is not drifting. It is not confused. It is not reacting emotionally. It is operating with precision. Electronic warfare teams begin analyzing changes in the electromagnetic spectrum. The bomber's radar emissions tighten slightly. Shorter sweeps. Focused arcs. It is listening harder now. It wants to know how NATO responds. The fighters rely mostly on passive sensors. They are careful not to transmit more than necessary. Every signal sent is information given away. Silence is strength. The Tu-160 inches closer to the invisible line. The line no one draws publicly, but everyone understands. Inside the fighter cockpit, the lead pilot speaks quietly. Maintain station. Calm breathing, steady hands. This is routine, but it never feels routine. The bomber makes another small move. A fractional reduction in speed. Not enough to call it a retreat, but enough to change intercept geometry. The calculation window stretches slightly. Inside the command center, analysts exchange quick looks. It's testing response timing. The Tu-160's engines burn evenly. No throttle spike. No sudden maneuver. It isn't preparing to flee. It isn't preparing to attack. It is forcing NATO to stay disciplined. If NATO moves too aggressively, headlines follow. If NATO does nothing, weakness is noted. Balance is everything. The fighters slide closer into visual confirmation range. The pilots can now clearly see the markings on the bomber's fuselage. The red star insignia stands out against the white body. The Tu-160's wings remain locked in cruise position. That matters. Wings swept back would indicate speed and aggression. Extended wings mean endurance and patience. This is a pressure mission. Back in the monitoring center, the closest point of approach is now under 2 miles. That is tight at this altitude. One wrong move, one sudden turn, one unexpected radar lock, and things escalate fast. Another radio call goes out. Russian aircraft, you are approaching monitored airspace. State intentions. Nothing. The silence becomes louder than any reply. 4:29. The Tu-160 begins a shallow lateral turn. Not away, not inward. Sideways. A controlled drift. It reduces the angle of approach without surrendering position. Inside the command center, tension shifts. That move buys seconds. Maybe minutes. The fighters mirror the turn perfectly, maintaining offset geometry. No aggressive closure, no show of force, just presence. Electronic monitoring detects a small change in radar emissions from the bomber. Less active, still on, still sweeping, but softer. The Tu-160's crew feels the environment changing. More NATO assets are now airborne, though not visible on this immediate intercept. Layers are forming quietly. The bomber's speed drops again, slightly. Now the trend begins to open the window rather than compress it. Inside the fighter cockpit, the second pilot observes. Trend diverging. That phrase spreads through the monitoring center. The Tu-160 holds the shallow turn for several long seconds. Every system records everything. Every movement is logged. This is no longer about detection. It's about nerve. The bomber could still roll back toward the line. It could accelerate. It could lock radar and force a reaction. Instead, it holds steady. The fighters maintain discipline. No hand signals, no dramatic wing rocks, no unnecessary radio chatter. This is not a confrontation. This is a controlled conversation at 40,000 feet. The sun glints off metal surfaces. Vapor trails stretch thin behind all three aircraft. To anyone far below, the sky looks peaceful. It isn't. Inside the monitoring center, someone quietly says, "If it continues this vector, the incident resolves." No one answers. Because until the bomber commits fully away from the line, nothing is resolved. 4:34. The Tu-160 adjusts its nose slightly farther outward. This time, the change is clearer. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. The intercept geometry begins to widen. The decision window is opening. Still no radio response. Still no announcement. Just mathematics shifting in NATO's favor. The fighters hold position a little longer, ensuring the change is consistent. The Tu-160 does not reverse. It continues the outward drift. And in that slow, measured adjustment, the pressure begins to ease, continuing with the same simple, controlled style. 4:36. The Tu-160 is turning outward. But something else is happening. Not in the sky. On the ground. While the fighters maintained position, another layer of response activated quietly. Tankers repositioned. Additional fighters climbed to altitude farther away. Naval radar networks aligned. Air defense systems shifted posture. None of it was loud. None of it was public. But it was fast. The bomber's crew may not see those changes directly, but they can feel them. Strategic aircraft are built to sense patterns. Shifts in radar coverage, changes in background signals, new emissions appearing at the edge of detection. The electromagnetic picture has changed. The Tu-160's radar sweep pauses briefly, then resumes. Shorter arcs, more focused. It is checking the environment again. Inside the command center, an analyst speaks. They know. No one explains further. The bomber continues its shallow turn. Speed remains steady. Altitude unchanged. But now the closest point of approach is increasing rather than shrinking. That shift is everything. The U.S. response did not rely on threats. It did not rely on radio warnings. It relied on geometry and presence. The fighters maintain lateral offset, close enough to escort, far enough to avoid provocation. The Tu-160 makes a second, clearer turn away from the monitored boundary. This one removes any ambiguity. It is disengaging, not retreating dramatically, not diving away, just redirecting, preserving face. Inside the lead fighter cockpit, the pilot confirms, vector diverging, stable. The monitoring center updates the timeline. Decision window closed. The bomber's engines maintain smooth, even thrust. No surge, no panic. It is leaving the way it arrived, controlled and precise. 4:41. The distance increases mile by mile. The fighters do not pursue aggressively. They shadow long enough to confirm intent, then gradually widen their own arc. Professional discipline to the end. The Tu-160's radar emissions soften further. Not off, never off, but less probing now. The mission has gathered its data. The message has been delivered. And so has the response. Inside the monitoring room, the tension finally shifts. Shoulders relax slightly. Conversations remain calm, technical, precise. No celebration. This was never about victory. It was about preventing escalation. The bomber continues on its new heading. The line on the radar display stretches outward. Its symbol shrinks, becomes less dominant. The fighters peel slightly back, maintaining distance but no longer in tight formation. The sky begins to empty. 4:48. The Tu-160 is now clearly exiting the monitored sector. No climb, no dive, no last-second maneuver. It leaves the same way it arrived, steady and calculated. Inside the command center, logs begin replaying automatically. Every second of the encounter is reviewed. Speed changes, heading adjustments, radar emission patterns, tiny decisions measured in fractions of miles. This is where the real work begins, because the public may never hear about this morning. But analysts will study it for weeks. What did the bomber learn? What did NATO reveal? Were response times fast enough? Were signals controlled properly? The captain finally steps back from the main display. Event resolving, someone says. Not defeated, not repelled. Resolved. Words matter. The fighters confirm separation distance is increasing steadily. Fuel calculations update. Mission parameters shift from intercept to escort termination. 0452. The Tu-160 crosses beyond the outer monitored edge. It is no longer a direct factor. Its radar return shrinks further. The sky above Europe returns to normal patterns of civilian traffic and routine patrol. But everyone in that monitoring room understands something important. The U.S. moved fast, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The bomber came close enough to test reaction times. It left knowing exactly how quickly those reaction times activate. That knowledge is deterrence. The fighters begin easing back toward their bases. Engines settling. Formation spacing widening. No victory passes, no gestures, just professionalism. Inside the monitoring center, final timestamps bracket the event. Start, peak, resolution. The encounter will be archived as one more silent standoff in modern airspace, a test of restraint rather than firepower. And in that silence, the real message was sent. No missiles fired, no warnings shouted, but everything changed. Perfect. Final section. Same tone, simple, controlled, steady. 0500. The Tu-160 is now well outside the monitored sector. Its radar return is smaller, less dominant. Just another aircraft moving across the upper atmosphere. But the morning is not over. Inside the monitoring center, the real work begins. Screens rewind. Data layers stack on top of each other. Every second is replayed. Every heading adjustment is measured. Every radar emission is analyzed. Because what happened in the sky lasted less than an hour. What it means will last much longer. The Tu-160 did not wander into NATO-monitored airspace by accident. Strategic bombers do not make navigation mistakes like that. The flight path was calculated, the altitude was chosen, the speed adjustments were deliberate. The shallow turns were intentional. This was a pressure mission, not an attack. Not a patrol, a demonstration, a way to test response time, a way to observe radar coverage, a way to measure discipline. The bomber never locked radar aggressively. It never crossed into full violation. It stayed just inside the gray area where reaction is required. But escalation is optional. That is modern deterrence. Push close. Watch the response. leave without firing. The reaction was fast, but more important than speed was control. The scramble order went out quickly. Fighters were airborne within minutes. Intercept geometry was calculated precisely. But the response did not overreact. No aggressive head-on approach, no unnecessary radio threats, no dramatic maneuvers. The fighters approached from the side. They stayed offset. They relied on passive sensors. They avoided transmitting too much radar energy. Why? Because escalation often begins with misunderstanding. If the fighters had locked weapons radar, the bomber might have responded defensively. If the fighters had closed too aggressively, the bomber might have maneuvered. Instead, both sides maintained restraint. And restraint is strength. What most people never see is what happened beyond the intercept. While the Tu-160 held position near the boundary, additional assets moved quietly. More fighters climbed at distant bases. Air defense systems shifted posture. Naval radar networks aligned. Command chains activated backup timelines. None of that was visible to the bomber directly, but the electromagnetic environment changed. Background signals increased. Patterns shifted. Strategic crews notice those things. They feel when the sky becomes crowded. And when that shift happens, calculations change. The Tu-160's shallow turn outward likely wasn't emotional. It was mathematical. Risk no longer favored holding the line. The most dangerous part of the encounter was not when the bomber arrived. It was when it held position, when the closest point of approach narrowed, when reaction times compressed to seconds. That is the decision window. Inside that window, every small movement matters. A radar spike can trigger defensive systems. A sudden turn can look like a run. A minor speed increase can look like attack preparation. This time, neither side crossed that invisible threshold. The bomber probed. The fighters shadowed. The line held. And then the bomber turned away. Not dramatically, not sharply, just enough. That is how experienced crews end a standoff, without headlines. To most civilians, nothing happened. There was no explosion, no press conference, no viral footage. Commercial flights continued their routes. Cities below remained unaware. But in military terms, a message was exchanged. Russia demonstrated reach. The United States demonstrated readiness. Both sides measured the other. Both sides collected data. And both sides avoided escalation. That balance is fragile. It depends on training, on discipline, on calm voices in small rooms. Inside the command center, voices never rose. Inside the fighter cockpits, breathing stayed steady. No one reached for switches they didn't need. That is not luck. That is training. Modern air power is not just about machines. It is about people who know when not to act. Pilots are trained for combat, but they are also trained for restraint. Operators are trained to detect threats, but also to avoid misreading signals. The most dangerous mistake in airspace confrontation is panic. There was none that morning. The question remains quietly in every analysis room. What if the Tu-160 had turned inward instead of outward? What if it had increased speed rather than reduced it? What if radar emissions had shifted from observation to targeting? The sequence exists. Everyone knows it. Escalation ladders are rehearsed in simulations. But the fact that the sequence remained unused is the real success. The system worked, not because it was aggressive, but because it was disciplined. The final logs. By 5:30, the incident is fully documented. Start time, intercept time, closest approach, turn away, exit time, all recorded. The captain signs off on the event summary. No dramatic language, no emotional wording, just facts. Strategic bomber approached monitored boundary. Intercept conducted. Aircraft diverged. Event resolved. Resolved. That word carries weight. Not repelled, not defeated, resolved. Because in modern deterrence, the goal is not to win a battle, it is to prevent one. This encounter may never appear in major news, and that is intentional. Public drama often increases tension. Silence maintains stability. But inside defense communities, this morning will be discussed. Response times will be evaluated. Electronic signatures will be compared. Tactical positioning will be refined. The next time may look similar, or it may look different. Either way, systems will be ready. Strategic bombers like the Tu-160 are symbols. They are flying statements. They carry capability that reaches across continents. When they approach monitored airspace, they are not just flying, they are signaling. And when the U.S. moves fast, quietly, precisely, that is also a signal. Deterrence in the modern world is not loud. It is measured. It is controlled. It is often invisible. The strongest message is sometimes the one never spoken. By sunrise, the sky looks normal. Commercial jets leave vapor trails across peaceful blue. Routine patrol aircraft follow standard routes. Nothing dramatic remains. But for nearly an hour, the balance of caution and power was tested. And it held. The Tu-160 returned home with data. The U.S. forces returned with confirmation of readiness. No missiles fired, no warning shots, no emergency landings, just geometry, discipline, and speed. The next radar spike will eventually appear. Another aircraft, another test, another quiet morning where professionals prevent history from changing. And when it happens, the response will likely look just as uneventful to anyone not paying attention. Because the most effective show of force is the one that never becomes a fight. And on that morning, Russia sent a Tu-160 into NATO airspace, and the U.S. moved fast, quietly, decisively, and without firing a single shot.